That's a great segue into Liz's workshop. So we might hand over to Liz now, if that's okay with all of the other steering circle members. Yep.
Well, I think Shelley and I are going to do it together. So.
Sorry, Shelley.
So I think what's been really interesting in the work that I've been doing recently has been in storytelling, and I never thought I would end up doing what I'm doing. I had a big change of life after 20 years in corporate, running ad agencies and marketing comms agencies, and I think it was after I had my first son, I kind of was like, yeah, I'll be back in 3 months, and then I was like, oh no, I don't think I'm going back. And I wanted to work in film, didn't know how I was going to do it, but I managed to get into film, and it wasn't until I was invited to direct something in Antarctica in around 2010 that I actually said no to that. And I remember my kids and my husband saying, "What? You said no?" And I'm like, "Yep." And I said, all the mother guilt things, but I actually realised, and I speak about this a lot, it was just that it was my fear that was holding me back, and I actually didn't want to go on the Drake Passage. I'd also seen a film a few weeks earlier called A Perfect Storm, which is just like the worst film to see if you're about to go on the Drake Passage. So I sort of had a moment of talking with myself to say, if you let fear define who you are and what you do, then you'll never know what you could do. And so I rang back the next day and said yes. And so I went to Antarctica with 40 teenagers. It was United Nations Year of Youth. My ears literally got chewed off about what we were doing or not doing for their future. We did hit a Category 5 hurricane on the way back. I did call my husband and say, I don't think I'm going to make it back. And he's a sailor from Sydney, and he said, don't be ridiculous, you're being so stupid about this, of course you'll make it back. But it was actually the perspective of the teenagers who were on the deck with us at midnight. And I was trying to brace the director of photography to try and film these massive waves that were crashing over us. And the youth were saying, this is better than Disney World. And I was like, okay, change your perspective, girls. So it was such a really good lesson. And many other stories. But last year I was invited to go to a workshop in Exeter with Professor Tim Lenton, who's one of the leading climate scientists in the world looking at systems of change and systems of thinking. And there were about 80 scientists from around the world, and I was privileged to be there. We worked very much on what the narrative needs to be, why stories aren't getting told, how to tell stories, and how to break through the press with a different way of speaking. And what came out of that was talking about positive tipping points, and it was also about flipping the script. And so what I learned from that was that there are so many positive stories and so many positive things that are being achieved around the world, which I didn't know about. And it made me realise that not a lot of people know about all the amazing things that are happening. Uruguay's been on renewable energy for 5 years, 100%. Scotland or England turned off its last coal plant. Wind energy ocean farms are generating massive power for the whole UK, and they're about to start exporting. Our neighbours in New Zealand are about 90% on renewable energy. Morocco just built the largest solar farm in the world. Kenya, all these places around the world are doing just extraordinary things. And I reflected on how do we actually start to tell stories differently. And what was picked up by the psychologists that were there is that when people hear stories that are more hopeful, they feel more inclined to feel hopeful and drive action. And so today in the workshop that Shelley and I are going to run, we're actually going to talk about how to flip the script. But before that, we might want to do an acknowledgement to country. Do you want to do us the favour?
I'll acknowledge the Jajawang, First Nations people of the country that we're on today, and look for their inspiration in our storytelling this afternoon so that we can help get the message out from all the women here at the Congress.
Yeah. And I think that one of the slides that's coming up was that when we were looking at doing this, the importance of storytelling is we can storytell just every day when we're having coffee with someone. We can actually think about something that we know is happening in our community that needs support. We can go to meetings and we can talk at those meetings and raise the voice of things that our women are doing and community are doing. We can write letters and we can also storytell. And storytell we can do very simply by using our phone. And a lot of us feel a little bit kind of wanting to be behind the scenes, not in front of the scenes. But there are stories we can tell, and there are ways that we can tell those stories. So I wanted to just share with you a little quick moment of introduction. I know it's the only man that's going to speak at this event. However, I said to Janet, Professor Tim Lenton always talks about the influence of his grandmother and his mother. And when he was 4 years old, his grandmother used to take him walking in the Cotswolds and in nature. And she taught him the value of nature. And then his mother carried on that role and taught him also the value of nature and how everything is connected. He then studied the Gaia principles and worked with James Lovelock. And all through his life, the influences on his life have always been his grandmother and his mother, who instilled in him amazing values that he's carried with him into his scientific work. So I thought it would be lovely just to hear a few words from him about storytelling before we go into our workshops. And we're going to put 7 tables around here, and they have 7 different themes. We'll tell you the themes. Now, if everybody races to nature, I'm going to have to break you up because there are other themes. But we're going to put you into storytelling themes, and then we're going to go through a little workshop with you. And at the end of that workshop, you're going to have all made with your team a little video. And you mightn't think that you want to say anything on camera, but I swear by the time we finish it, you'll be like, I can do that. So anyway, let's hear a little moment from Tim.
My name's Tim Lenton. I'm a professor over in the UK, professor of climate change in the University of Exeter. But I'm excited to have a chat with you really in this, extraordinary time where many of us have felt, anxiety about the changing climate, the damages it's causing. But I want to help you as you think about making short stories, pieces of film, think about how we've got to flip the script. We've got to get ourselves to a place where we're not just feeling that pain and anxiety about the bad things that are happening in the world. We need to see that we can be part of the change that we need to create a clean, green, zero emission future where we've got climate change under control, we're restoring nature. So let me talk a tiny bit maybe about the journey that I've been on there. I mean, I started out 20 years ago trying to draw the world's attention to the big risks we are facing in a changing climate. The possibility that we could pass what we call tipping points in the climate, where bad changes in the climate, like the loss of big ice sheets or the Amazon rainforest or the coral reefs on the Great Barrier Reef, would become kind of self-propelling, irreversible. These are big risks we need to avoid, and it certainly brought the kind of anxiety in me that, oh my God, this is serious, we've got to do something. But what I've realized is, we can do something, and that there's a whole other script, a whole other narrative about changes in the right direction, changes to renewable energy, to electrifying transport and everything else, to restoring nature, that are also becoming self-propelling, exponential changes in a good direction. But because some people have got behind the changes. So I call those things, in general, positive tipping points, where change in a good direction becomes self-propelling. And so let me just give you a flavour of some examples. There's a country, Norway, in Europe, right, that has tipped completely from people buying petrol and diesel cars to the whole market now is dominated by everyone buying electric vehicles. That's happened in just a decade, that total shift. And it's happened because some people, some social activists a couple of decades before that, realized the opportunity there was for a change to clean technology and lobbied their government actually to put in some policies that would incentivize the shift to electric vehicles. Policies like waiving road tolls for electric vehicles or waiving the VAT. Because in those early days, there needed to be something to bring that technology to be competitive, shall we say, in price for the consumer. And they succeeded in achieving that tipping point. But what's the good news is, when we think globally and for Australia about adoption of technologies like solar panels or electric vehicles, the more that we adopt them as consumers, the cheaper and the better those technologies get. So, for example, the batteries in electric vehicles, they're a tenth of the price they were a decade ago now. They've got spectacularly cheaper as more and more people have bought them or adopted them. And the range of you can get from an electric vehicle from a given mass of battery has gone up threefold, just because the more we adopt the technology, the innovators make it better and better and cheaper and cheaper. And as it scales up, it gets cheaper. We call that economies of scale. The same story's unfolded for solar panels. They're a tenth of the price of what they were a decade ago. And that's, again, these amazing amplifying feedbacks. The more we adopt them, the cheaper they get, and generally the better they get. And that opportunity sits there for other technologies that we're going to need to get ourselves out of climate trouble. In simple terms, in the economy and in the energy system, we kind of got to electrify everything we can. And when we get to activities that are really hard to electrify, like making steel, actually, well, we can still do it. We can make some stuff called green hydrogen by using renewable electricity to split water. And we can use that green hydrogen to reduce the iron from iron ore to then go into the steel making process. And then we can have what's called an electric arc furnace powered by renewable electricity to make totally zero emission steel. Wow, fantastic, right? At the same time, we're going to need to flip the script on nature. And some of that is going to come back to how do we eat, frankly, because it's a worldwide trend to more meat eating that's currently the prime driver of the destruction of nature. So it'll be great if we flip the script a little bit on our diets to rein in our meat eating. That'll be better for the planet and better for us. But also for nature, we've got to go to work to regenerate the ecosystems that are already degraded, whether that's bits of the Great Barrier Reef that are being lost or degraded forests in the tropics or whatever. And the great news there is we can work with nature's built-in feedback loops to try and tip nature in a positive direction back to a more regenerated, productive ecosystems. And then it's the same story for farming, basically. You might have heard the buzz phrase regenerative agriculture, but if that's going to be real, that's going to be all about us working with nature to make the soil more productive and healthy, to get better yields with lower inputs, you might say more organic methods, but certainly with precision agriculture, with a bunch of sustainable innovations. So to come back to today, to your journey or your kind of task, making some short films, some short stories together, well, you see why the script's got to be flipped here. It needs to be, I think, what I want to hear from you or see from you is a story of here's our agency to be part of creating this positive change that can become self-amplifying and self-propelling. So that, we feel that anxiety, we feel this climate change thing is starting to hurt, but we've got the power to make a difference. So on that note, I can't wait to see what you come up with. I want to say, good luck with the filming, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the outcomes and seeing how you flip the script.
Well, I just want to say thank you to Tim, and it was just a little video that he recorded for me just to give you a sense of a lot of challenges, but there are also good things that are starting to happen. And so how can we storytell in a way that makes people feel more hopeful? And also we know that when we accelerate change and we get about a 20% adoption, once we get past that 20%, we have a much faster acceleration towards 80%. So we're going to have some fun. We are going to actually break into groups. We might have just changed these slightly after we heard some of the comments from different people over the last 12 hours or
Experienced
so.
international film director.
So
Agile.
what we're going to do is I'm going to place around here on the table what the themes are. I'm going to explain to you how it's going to work, and I want to say thank you to the table circle mentors who are coming together to run your table. Everybody's voice matters. Everybody's opinions and voices count. It's all about partnerships and collaboration around the table. So we want you to have fun doing this, but we want to also hear your voice and your heart. So I'm going to go and announce the tables. I'm going to do table drops, and then you can all move, but we only want about 7 or 8 at each table. So if your first choice is maybe taken, go to the next one. Okay, here we go. Okay. Jenny. Jenny is going to run a table called Australia's Energy Transition, Women at the Heart of the Shift. That table's going to be over here. Anybody who'd like to work with Jenny on that, make your way over. This one is Australia's Energy Transition, and it's Women at the Heart of the Energy Shift. Shelley, I might get you putting these out with me if you can help.
Okay.
The second one is actually going to be run by Wendy. And this one is about the role of the women's voice and Ireland's sisters in the lead up to COP31. This is the next table, the role of women's voices and Ireland's sisters in the lead up to COP31 with Wendy. If you'd like to work with Janet, Janet is on table 3. She's going to be looking at the role of Women's Climate Congress, the role it can play in the fabric of climate change. That's with Janet, and that's on table 3. Over there, Jen. Okay, we have some future generation voices in the room here. They're going to be working with Ellie. You don't need to be a future generation, but if you would like to work on helping support the youth voice, the gender lens that young women can have, we'd like to hear your voice for change. If you'd like to help support Ellie on crafting that, Ellie, your table over there. Okay, for those of you who'd like to work on nature, why nature is a critical part of the climate solution with Shelley. Shelley, lead nature. Off you go with Shelley. All right, the second last one is on sweltering cities and heat, the hidden gender toll on women in Australia. Who would like to work on the hidden gender toll on women in Australia and heat with Tanya? Tanya, take your team. And the last one is working with me, and that's on the benefits of a gender-inclusive climate policy. And I'm going to be working on this table over here on the benefits of gender-inclusive climate policy over here. So I should say that everybody start with the introduction. You're going to do a circle introduction with your table mentor. From this point on, we've got about 45 minutes that we're going to work to create a little 1-minute script at each table. When you have finished the process, if somebody could just raise their hand up and say, we're ready, then there's myself and Wendy and we're filming. So just put your hand up when your table's ready. The second point I want to make is that while you're waiting for your table to be filmed, please use this as a time of discussion to talk about the sort of letter you would like to write to the Victorian government to get in on the 8th of April. The sort of letter, it could be to do with the theme that your table is doing, and then we'd like to collect points from your table that you'd like to have included in the letter. All right, we're off and running.